Friedlieben und aber auch tapfer ist. Und ihr müsst friedfertig sein.
Adolf Hitler plunged the world into the most catastrophic war in human history. His rise to power was marked by the influence of a ruthless inner circle. The key figures who brought the Nazi vision to life, from Heinrich Himmler, the architect of the Holocaust, to Joseph Goebbels, the voice of Nazi propaganda, these leaders were the enforcers of Hitler's brutal regime. Together, his men shaped one of the darkest chapters in human history. When Adolf Hitler returned from the horrors of World War I, he was a shattered man, his soul scarred by the blood-soaked trenches and the brutal chaos of the battlefield. The once proud soldier now faced a devastated Germany, its defeat and surrender a cruel blow to his nationalistic fervor. Fueled by a sense of betrayal and a profound disillusionment with the German government, he blamed for the nation's collapse. This period of anger ignited a desire for vengeance and transformation, setting the stage for his radical ideas and the dark path that would ultimately lead him to reshape history in the most catastrophic ways.
When Germany finally capitulates, Hitler is like millions of other servicemen, and indeed civilians, who regards the German army as being what's called stabbed in the back. And this becomes this huge myth that basically it's the people in Berlin who are responsible for the defeat and not really the Allies. And the people in Berlin are members of the left, they are Jews, they are all these sort of kind of quote-unquote evil people that Hitler and his fellow soldiers regard as having betrayed the likes of him.
This idea that the German army would have been victorious on the battlefield and that this peace treaty was signed in a way that wasn't to Germany's benefit. And of course that peace treaty was very punitive. So many articles in it making restrictions on many things, on the size of the German army, which had to be limited to 100,000, to the standing army. Took away land that was German. It banned any union between Austria and Germany, and of course Hitler had a lot to say about that, among many, many other harsh provisions.
Hitler came across a small nationalist party in Munich, one that shared his growing resentment and ideas. Seeing potential in its message, he recognized it as a platform through which he could channel his ambitions and begin shaping his vision for Germany's future.
After the war, Hitler's actually working for a small army intelligence unit, and he's actually tasked with spying on extremist small political parties in Munich. One day, Hitler, kind of incognito, goes along to this small party meeting, and it's the German Socialist Workers' Party. And he's meant to be spying on them, but actually he looks at their message and what they're saying about the way the world is and how Germany should be, and how they've been stabbed in the back by their masters in Berlin, and how the communism is on the rise, and how the Allies have utterly brought Germany to her knees with the Versailles Treaty, with those huge reparations. And Hitler looks at the message being promulgated by this party and goes, you know what, I want a part of that.
Hitler joined the DAP, the German Workers' Party, in 1919, and it was a very small and unremarkable party on the radical right of German politics, and actually one of dozens of similar parties, and quite unremarkable, until Hitler joined and really made a difference.
Recognizing his fiery oratory and unyielding passion, the party quickly appointed Hitler as chief of propaganda. Hitler rebranded the group, giving it a new name that echoed his vision: the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which we now know as the Nazi Party.
Hitler's initial job for the Nazi Party is really in charge of their propaganda, and that job will later be done famously by Joseph Goebbels. But Hitler is very much aware, and this is where he's very advanced and very sophisticated for his time, that actually what's key is how you get your message out there.
Some of the important ways in which he helped the party to develop was through the initiation of a newspaper, so a party newspaper called the Volkische Beobachter, the People's Observer.
And also what Hitler is absolutely amazing at is speech making. And to begin to understand Hitler, you've really got to understand that he was the most amazing demagogue. He got on that stage, this little man, and he would sort of grow in stature. He would sort of absolutely take over the entire beer hall with his presence. And he would shout and he'd get quiet and he would almost enter into a kind of trance. And the audiences would be mesmerized by this. And indeed, they'd be mesmerized by it for decades. And this is key to how Hitler gets into power, because when he's on the stage, he becomes another figure.
Dieses Land, seine neue Mission, sie entspricht dem Gebot, das einst die deutschen Siedler aus allen Gauen des Altreichs hierher gerufen hat. Die älteste Ostmark des deutschen Volkes soll von jetzt ab das jüngste Bollwerk der deutschen Nation und damit des Deutschen Reiches sein.
Hitler initially is very revolutionary minded. He's looked at how Mussolini has taken power in fascist Italy by his famous march on Rome. And Hitler's thinking, actually, well, this is what I need to do. I need to do a sort of a march, I'm not going to wait to get to power, in a kind of democratic process. I mean, that's just going to take me forever. And so what you end up having in 1923 is this infamous failed putsch in which Hitler and some of his acolytes like Hermann Goering, they march through the streets of Munich and they try to seize power by rounding up all the local politicians in a beer hall. And it's called the Beer Hall Putsch for that reason. But it's a dreadful failure. They're marching down the street, they're fired upon by police. Hermann Goering is wounded really quite badly. This is an absolute farce. Any account of the Beer Hall Putsch that says it was a heroic and noble effort by the Nazis to seize power, I'm afraid, is reading Nazi propaganda.
I think that maybe the most important thing that came out of this subsequently was that Hitler realised that he would have to find a way to take his power in Germany in a legal way rather than by force. So I think that the circumstances hadn't been exactly right for what he'd expected. I think he thought he had more support than he did. I mean, he did have some important support already at this stage, but not enough to do what he was intending to do in Munich in 1923.
Den Folgen dieses Verbrechens nur dann wird begegnen können, wenn man...
After the failed beer hall putsch in 1923, Hitler found himself arrested and sentenced to prison. Far from being defeated, he used his time behind bars to reflect and strategize. In the solitude of his cell, he poured his thoughts and beliefs onto paper, crafting Mein Kampf. This manifesto would outline his twisted ideology and serve as a blueprint for his future ambitions.
So what we've got in Mein Kampf is anti-Semitism, very virulent anti-Semitism, really strong language, and this is repeated time and again throughout that book. The other key enemy, of course, was communism or Bolshevism. So in Mein Kampf as well, we have many arguments and this kind of diatribe against this enemy of Bolshevism or communism.
It gives you a lot of insight into Hitler's state of mind. It shows you that Hitler's thinking was kind of all over the place. He would take a theory from there and a theory from there, cobble it together, and two would make six. It really was intellectually a real mess.
The other thing that he did in Mein Kampf was really to create this, again, this sort of myth or this idea of an Aryan race in Germany, the master race or the Herrenvolk, and the idea that that German race should be unpolluted or untainted by inferior or foreign blood.
Basically, everybody who isn't a purebred, decent German son of the soil or honest factory worker is basically out to get him and the German people.
In Mein Kampf, Hitler laid bare his virulent anti-Semitism, describing Jews as the root of all Germany's problems and a threat to the purity of the Aryan race. He propagated the idea of an international Jewish conspiracy, blaming them for Germany's defeat in World War I and the subsequent economic hardships. Hitler also expressed his deep resentment toward the Treaty of Versailles, viewing it as a humiliating betrayal that had crippled Germany. He vowed to dismantle the treaty, reclaim lost territories, and restore Germany to its former glory through aggressive expansionism. Upon his release from prison in December 1924, Hitler emerged more determined than ever. He used Mein Kampf as a manifesto, rallying followers to his cause with its promises of national revival, racial purity, and the undoing of the Versailles Treaty. This book became the ideological foundation for the Nazi movement, guiding its rise to power in the years to come.
After Hitler was released from Landsberg prison in 1925, he set about refounding the Nazi Party, which had fallen into disarray, and really not just refounding it, but really trying to bring it back to strength, and indeed from strength to strength. So between 1925 and 1928, he was very much concerned to try to organize the party as best as possible, put a lot of effort and energy into canvassing, trying to get new membership, and indeed trying to get new voters.
And Hitler starts to build up his power by, trying to employ and find the right people who are going to listen to the beat of his drum and follow it. And so there's a lot of very patient politicking and a lot of persuasion, a lot of speech making. It's a very, very difficult rise to power. But Hitler knows that it can't take place through force. It has to take place from the ballot box and not the bullet.
Hitler captivated the German people with fiery speeches that promised hope and renewal amidst the despair of economic turmoil and national humiliation. As he spoke of reviving the economy, defying the Treaty of Versailles, and reclaiming Germany's lost honor, more and more citizens began to rally behind him. But then, in 1929, a revolutionary event happened that would launch Hitler's popularity immensely: the Wall Street crash. A tidal wave of economic devastation across the globe. But nowhere did it strike harder than in Germany. Already crippled by the crushing weight of war reparations and the humiliating terms of the Treaty of Versailles, the country was thrown into chaos as banks crumbled, businesses shut their doors, and millions were cast into unemployment.
This sort of put into place a really terrible situation for Germany, economically, socially, and politically, because it brought about such a crisis, and none of the governments between 1929 and the time when Hitler came into power in 1933 seemed to be able to deal with the economic crisis, and so it was political and economic turmoil.
Sensing his moment, Hitler pounced on the crisis with ruthless precision. He painted a picture of Germany betrayed from within, blaming the Weimar leaders, Jews, and communists for the nation's suffering. With each fiery speech, he stoked the flames of fear and resentment, presenting himself as the savior who could lead Germany out of the abyss.
Extremist politics thrives on chaos, poverty, destitution, and want. And what you see as a result of the Wall Street crash and the slump, the late 20s, early 30s, are all those things in this hideous cocktail that an extremist like Hitler, and indeed don't forget that communists are also trying to get into power at the same time, and they're seeing this as an opportunity too. So let's not think that Hitler's unique, but obviously he's saying, I can solve this.
As desperation gripped the nation, the people flocked to him, turning the Nazi Party from a marginalized faction into a powerful force poised to reshape Germany's destiny. In January 1933, Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, capitalizing on the political instability and his growing popular support. Once in office, he swiftly consolidated his power through strategic maneuvering and political aggression. After President Paul von Hindenburg's death in August 1934, Hitler seized the opportunity to merge the presidency with the chancellorship, declaring himself Führer and solidifying his total control over the German state.
He's able to take on the role of both president and chancellor and kind of create this new role for himself, and that is the role of Führer, the German word for leader. That is a fascist term, be in no doubt. This is a kind of new form of governance that Germany now has. Other parties are banned. The only party allowed is the Nazi Party. This has become a totalitarian state, and Hitler can say to the German people, you voted for it. It's a con, and it's a con that worked.
Determined to restore Germany's military might, he secretly began the construction of a formidable air force, the Luftwaffe, and expanded the army in direct violation of the treaty's prohibitions. This rapid build-up not only emboldened his regime, but also set the stage for future aggressive expansionist policies. marking the beginning of a new era of German militarization and paving the way for the onset of World War II.
He does everything that the Versailles Treaty tells him not to do. He remilitarizes and marches into various zones where he's not allowed to be, such as the Rhineland. And he also starts building up his armed forces, secretly at first, and then blatantly. All this soon becomes really blatant. And the Allies, such as the British and the French, they just look at it, and what do? They do nothing.
In 1935, the Nazi regime enacted the Nuremberg Laws, a set of draconian legal measures that institutionalized anti-Semitism and stripped Jews of their rights. These laws relegated Jews to the status of mere subjects rather than citizens, and the law for the protection of German blood and German honor, which prohibited marriages and sexual relations between Jews and non-Jewish Germans. The Nuremberg laws also mandated that Jews wear identifying badges and excluded them from various professions, public spaces, and social activities.
So we know that from as early as Hitler's writings in Mein Kampf that he was personally anti-Semitic. And what we see once the Third Reich comes into power is his personal anti-Semitism translated into state policy. So from the very earliest days and months of the Third Reich, there were many different measures, legal measures taken against the Jews, and also illegal measures as well.
Just as he had promised in Mein Kampf, Hitler is treating the Jews in Germany as an internal enemy. So what you see are laws stripping Jews of their German citizenship. You see awful things like Jews not being allowed to go to swimming pools, because if a Jew swam in a public swimming pool, the water would have to be drained because the Jew had dirtied the water. So you can see that you've got this sort of awful both political and cultural exclusion of the Jewish community.
The factories of Germany were also repurposed and expanded to fuel the rapid buildup of the German military. Germany's industrial might was redirected towards producing weapons, vehicles, and equipment, with plans to annex territories and assert German dominance across Europe. Britain and France were wary of Hitler's ambitions and the blatant violations of the Treaty of Versailles. Both nations, haunted by the memories of World War I and determined to prevent another conflict, attempted to negotiate to contain Hitler's aggression. But their efforts were often undermined by the rapid pace of Germany's military expansion and the strategic cunning of Hitler.
More far-sighted people in Britain and France are sort of going, well, where's this going to end? Because if you keep giving someone something, they're going to keep wanting more, because that's human nature, and that's what Hitler did.
Hitler's forces prepared for an imminent invasion of Poland. Britain and France issued a stern ultimatum, warning that any attack on Poland would result in a declaration of war. Despite these warnings, Hitler remained defiant, viewing the threats as hollow and dismissing them as bluster. On September 1, 1939, Hitler launched the invasion of Poland, triggering a swift and decisive response from Britain and France. True to their word, both nations declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939.
In September 1939, Hitler invades Poland, along with Stalin. Soviet Russia also invades Poland at the same time. But what the world remembers is the fact that Hitler invaded Poland, and a couple of days later, the British declare war on Germany.
The German population, because of Hitler's popularity, and even though they had experienced the horrors of the First World War and the trench warfare of the First World War, and all of the shell shock and everything that went with it, because he was so popular, they might have been delighted to go to war in September 1939, but they went along with it.
At first, Hitler's military strategies achieved remarkable success, utilizing blitzkrieg tactics that combined fast-moving and coordinated attacks by air and ground forces. This strategy overwhelmed Polish defenses, leading to a swift victory. Hitler continued his aggressive expansion. In April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, securing crucial strategic positions and resources. The following year, in May 1940, Hitler launched a surprise offensive against France, bypassing the heavily fortified Maginot Line through a rapid advance across the Ardennes forest. Within weeks, French forces were defeated and Germany occupied Paris, leading to the fall of France. Central to Hitler's ideological drive was his belief in Aryan racial superiority. which he claimed justified his aggressive expansionism and the subjugation of other nations. This warped ideology extended to his treatment of Jews, whom he regarded as racially inferior and a threat to Aryan purity. As German forces occupied conquered territories, they systematically rounded up Jews and transported them to forced labor camps and death camps. The death camps, shrouded in a veil of unspeakable horror, were sites where the relentless machinery of genocide turned countless lives into mere shadows of despair, leaving behind only the echoes of their suffering and the stark reminder of humanity's darkest depths.
Death camps, all of those were on Polish soil, so they were out of the immediate frame of sight or reference of the Germans. So again, in some way, they were happening elsewhere and not really in their immediate field of vision.
These are places that are places of deep, deep horror, because you didn't go there to work, you went there to die. And you would arrive, and within 30 minutes, you'd be dead. Treblinka, for example, is no bigger, if you visit it, than a football stadium, the size of a football pitch. And in that very small area, around 850,000 men, women and children were gassed. It's just the most horrific thought if you ever visit a place like that. Auschwitz, again, a very huge, iconic place associated with the Holocaust, of course, famously where 1 million Jews were put to death, many of whom were gassed on arrival. But it also was a concentration camp rather than just an extermination camp. So it has these two horrific roles. And don't forget, Auschwitz and places like this, they're huge. Auschwitz is 3 camps spread over about 10 miles. I mean, these are factories of death. There's no doubt about it.
The relentless atrocities of the concentration camps seemed to foreshadow a grim reckoning as the tide of the war began to shift. The Allies' successful D-Day invasion in June 1944 marked the beginning of a series of crushing defeats for Hitler's forces, with the Allies pressing in from the west and the Soviets advancing from the east. As his empire crumbled and his military campaigns faltered on multiple fronts, Hitler retreated into the confines of his bunker in Berlin.
Hitler's last days in the Führer bunker under the Reich Chancellery in the center of Berlin, are a kind of terrible end of a Shakespearean tragedy, as the thunder Russian artillery all around them, and they're deep inside this sort of concrete underground fortress. Everybody's sort of kind of going mad, and especially Hitler.
In the final days of April 1945, he married Eva Braun in a brief somber ceremony, a last desperate gesture in a world unraveling around him.
Finally, after many years of being Hitler's long-term partner, Hitler married Eva Braun that night. It was to be a very short-lived marriage because 2 days later, they both committed suicide together.
On April 30th, 1945, in a desperate and tragic climax, Hitler and Eva Braun took their own lives amidst the chaos of their crumbling world. As the news of their death spread, it was clear that Europe's most evil dictator was dead, and the shadow of his monstrous legacy began to recede. The fall of Berlin marked not just the end of Hitler's tyrannical reign, but the final chapter in a brutal war that had irrevocably altered the course of history.
On the 7th of May 1945, Germany surrendered. And once that had happened, the atrocities of the Nazi regime came to popular attention.
As the dust settled over the smouldering ruins of Berlin, the world began to grapple with the haunting legacy of Adolf Hitler, a man whose name would forever be etched in infamy. From the initial sparks of his incendiary rhetoric to the devastation wrought by his malevolent ambitions, Hitler's rise and fall embodied the darkest extremes of human cruelty and folly. His death marked the end of a cataclysmic era, but the scars left by his tyranny would endure, serving as a somber reminder of the perils of unchecked power and hatred. As we reflect on this harrowing chapter, we are called to remember the millions who suffered and to vow that such darkness will never again cast its shadow upon humanity. In the echoes of history, let the tale of Hitler be a clarion, call for vigilance, compassion, and a relentless pursuit of justice, ensuring that the horrors of the past never repeat themselves.